Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sean Academy. I'm sure you guys love that name. So we're going to start off today just with a little bit of review. So yesterday we learned how to calculate circumference of circles. So let's start off with a review question here. So here's a circle that we're given. We're given this distance here from the center to the outside. So that's the radius. R is 3 meters. And we want to find out what is the circumference. What's the distance around the outside? So we learned yesterday our formula for finding the circumference is circumference equals pi times diameter. So pi times diameter. This, again, symbol here is pi, which is 3.14. So we're given the radius, so that's not the number that we need. We need to find out what the diameter is. So we're very good at this now. We know that if it's a radius of 3, well then the diameter would be 2 radiuses, 3 meters and 3 meters. So our diameter would be all the way across. Diameter would be 6 meters. Okay, so now all I do is just plug that into my equation here. Find my circumference. Circumference equals pi, 3.14, times my diameter, 6 meters. Okay, and I just plug that into my calculator. 3.14 times 6 equals, that didn't work. 3.14 times 6 equals, there we go, 18.84 meters. Okay, so a circle with radius of 3 has a diameter of 6, means the distance around the outside is 18.84 meters. Okay, hopefully that all makes sense now. Today, we're going to be doing some other questions though. So we're going to be given some questions that you're given the circumference and you need to find out what the diameter or what the radius is. So say that this circle here has a circumference of, let's say, 95 centimeters. Okay, so the distance around the outside is 95 centimeters. And the question asks you, what is the diameter? What is the diameter? Well, what we can do is we can use that same equation that we had to find the diameter. So we know circumference equals pi times diameter. Okay, so we know what the circumference is, and we want to find out what the diameter is. Well, remember from earlier in the year, we can isolate this diameter to find out what that is. So this is thinking back to when we did algebra. And what we do to do that, we divide both sides of the equation by that number pi. Divide that side by pi, and divide that side by pi. And what happens is this pi and this pi cancel out, and what we're left with is circumference divided by pi equals the diameter. So there's a new equation that we can use, and I'll link this in a new formula sheet that I have for us today so that you have it to go off of. But it's simple. If you have the circumference and you're wanting to find out what the diameter is, well, here's your new equation that you can use. So I have the circumference. Circumference is 95 centimeters. I want to find out what the diameter is, so using this equation here, all I do is just divide it by 3.14, and that is going to equal my diameter. So what is that number? Well, 95 divided by 3.14 equals, there we go, 30.25, I'll just round it to 25 centimeters. Okay, so if I have a circle that's 95 centimeters in circumference, I plug it into this equation here, and I find out that my diameter is 30.25 centimeters. And what I could do, I could double check to make sure that this makes sense by plugging it back into my regular equation. So circumference equals pi times diameter. So here's what I think the diameter is. Let's just double check to make sure. So 3.14 times 30.25. And there we go. I get 34.985, not exactly 95, but that's because remember there was all these other decimal points here. So I rounded it. So this is just a rounding error, but it shows me that yes, 94.985. Yes, I'm in the right area. That's the right answer. Okay. Now I just have one final question that we're going to go over today. And this one's a little bit trickier. You need to think about what's going on here. So I'll read the question for us first. A bicycle tire has a spot of wet paint on it. Here's my bicycle tire, and here's my spot of paint on the tire. The radius of the tire is 30 centimeters. Okay, so the radius of my tire is 30 centimeters. How far will the bike travel between spots where it marks the ground? And how many times will it mark the ground in 1 kilometer? Well, let's start with this first part here. How far will the bike travel between spots where it marks the ground? Well, let's think about what's happening here. So this tire is turning, and every time this spot here hits the ground, it's going to leave a paint mark. Well, how far is it going to travel between spots where it hits the ground? Well, it's going to travel this far. It's going to travel a full rotation of the tire. What is that? It's going to travel the circumference. So every time the tire travels the distance of its circumference, this paint spot is going to hit back on the ground. So it's going to hit here, and then it's going to hit here, and then it's going to hit here, and so on. So when I need to find out how far the bike will travel between spots where it marks the ground, I need to find out how far this distance is. I need to find out the circumference of my tire. Okay, so I need to find out the circumference. So again, circumference is pi times diameter. So again, I'm given here a radius. This is not a diameter, it's a radius. So I need to think about what it takes to make my diameter, another 30 centimeters. So my diameter is all the way across 60 centimeters. So to find the circumference, I do pi 3.14 times 60 centimeters. And what do I get for that? 3.14 times 60 is 188.4 centimeters. 188.4 centimeters. Okay, so what that tells me, every 188.4 centimeters, this tire is going to do a full rotation, and that paint is going to mark a spot on the ground. So there's my answer to my first part. Every 188.4 centimeters, my tire is going to leave a paint mark on the ground. Now let's take a look at this second spot. How many times will it mark the ground in 1 kilometer? Well, first thing we should notice is that we're talking about kilometers here. So I want to know how much it goes in a kilometer. Here, we're talking about centimeters. So for this one, we need to do a little bit of a unit calculation. So let me just give you a couple of calculations. So remember that 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters. And 1 meter is 100 centimeters. So here we have 188.4 centimeters. We can do a quick calculation and see, okay, it takes 100 centimeters to make a meter, so that's 1 meter, and this other part becomes my decimal. So this 188.4 centimeters, that is 1.884 meters. So now what I need to see how many times my tire marks a spot on the paint every 1.884 meters. How many times it marks that in 1 kilometer in 1,000 meters. So what I do is see how many times 1.884 meters goes into 1,000 meters. So I divide 1,000 divided by 1.884 equals, there we go. So it's going to mark the ground 530.7. So 530 times, and then it won't quite get all the way around to mark it a 531st time. Okay, so basically what I just found out, every 1.884 meters, the paint marks the ground. So I do 1,000 divided by 1.884 to see how many times this number goes into my 1,000. How many times does my tire mark the ground in 1,000? And I get 530 times. Okay, so this last question that we're going to be doing today, this is a little bit trickier, so don't worry, parts of it are a little bit confusing, but it's kind of like that challenge question. Try your best. Don't panic if that last one's a little bit tricky. I think hopefully we're getting the idea of how to calculate circumference. I'll also be providing us an updated version of our formulas sheet, so you have that to use to make those quick calculations, so you can just plug in numbers into the formula. Okay, so good luck with our work today, guys.